As Sue has said, the theme of this year's LGBT History Month is religion, belief, and philosophy. So I thought I'd start off with a provocative assertion, you would expect nothing less from me, that organized religion is the single greatest global threat to human rights. I say organized religion to differentiate from individual people of faith. What I'm talking about is the institutions, the hierarchies, the leaderships of most faith organizations around the world. As Sue has said, this is not a one-sided, single, negative picture. There are many people of faith who are in our own communities and who are our allies, and we welcome, embrace, and thank them. But taking an overview of organized religion, when it comes to the rights of LGBT people and women, it is organized religion that is leading the fight against our equal rights. In Saudi Arabia, closer to home in Northern Ireland, in Brunei, Iran, Nigeria, Syria, and Israel, there are fundamentalist believers who are organizing to deny our basic human rights. In Russia, we all know about the anti-gay law enacted by the Putin regime in 2013. Not everyone realizes that that initiative was pushed by the Russian Orthodox Church. The Russian Orthodox Church is in alliance with the Putin dictatorship. There's a deal going on. Putin supports the Russian Orthodox Church, and in return, the Russian Orthodox Church supports the regime. Supports a regime which is not just persecutory towards LGBT people, but also to political oppositionists, minority nationalities, labor and trade union activists, and many, many others. In Uganda, we know it is the Church of Uganda, as well as the Catholic Church and Muslim leaders, who have been driving the push for new anti-gay legislation. And the horrendous Anti-Homosexuality Act, which in its initial draft provided for the death penalty for repeat same-sex offenders. That legislation was endorsed by many people in the hierarchy of the Church of Uganda, which is part of the global Anglican Communion. In the United States, it is right-wing Protestant evangelicals who fought tooth and nail against same-sex marriage, against employment protection legislation, and many other initiatives to support and protect LGBT communities. But, as I said, we also have many faith allies. Here in Britain, we have the Bishop of Buckingham, Alan Wilson, who has stuck his neck out in contradiction to the hostility we often experience from the Anglican hierarchy to defend our communities and our right to equality. His voice, his witness for our rights and freedoms is an amazing thing. He has gone the extra mile to support us as a bishop of the Church of England. In Scotland, they had the great Richard Holloway, the leader of the Episcopal Church, who way back when it was not fashionable or popular, championed LGBT rights in Scotland, in Britain, and throughout the world. In Africa, we have the great anti-apartheid icon, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who has said that racism and homophobia are two sides of similar prejudice. In fact, he has compared homophobia to racism. He said he did not fight for a free, non-racial South Africa, to allow any South African citizen to suffer oppression or discrimination. And he has made an extraordinary series of interventions to support LGBT rights in a continent where so many religious leaders are so implacably hostile. In Uganda, we have the immense courage of Bishop Christopher Senyonjo, formerly a bishop of the Church of Uganda, part of the Global Anglican Communion. He has spoken out for many years in defense of LGBT people. He set up a safe house for LGBT people fleeing mob violence and state persecution. And as a consequence, he was hounded out of the Church of Uganda. They even took away his pension. He's in his 80s. He's got no pension because the Church of Uganda penalized him for defending our communities by forcing him out of the church and then even taking away his pension. He knew the risks he was taking, but he took a stand because he believed it was the right thing to do. A man of enormous moral stature, little known outside of Uganda, but a man we can all look up to, a great heterosexual ally who has stood with us and suffered himself personally, not just excommunication from the church, not just the denial of his pension, but hate mail, death threats, and so on. Then, of course, we have within our own LGBT community people of faith who are struggling bravely and courageously against their religious leaderships. We've got the lesbian and gay Christian movement, Changing Attitude, Quest, Rainbow Jews, and Imam, the LGBTI Muslim group. They are challenging homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia in ways that hark back to how the rest of us had to fight 40 or 50 years ago. They do have allies. The religious bodies are not exclusively and entirely anti-LGBT, but they are fighting a much more difficult battle against much deeper entrenched views. And that does take real courage. Now, I'm not anti-religious. I'm not pro-religious. I'm not anti-religious. Providing religion does not seek to deny other people human rights. So I respect the right of people to hold religious beliefs, even though I don't share them. I believe that a scientific, rational understanding of the world is a better way to understand who we are, where we've come from, and how to make things right. But I will defend all people of faith who suffer persecution. That is why I defend persecuted Christians in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, persecuted Sunni Muslims in Iran, persecuted Shia Muslims in Saudi Arabia, persecuted Hindus in Pakistan, persecuted Muslims in India. To me, all discrimination, whether it's by religion or any other system of ideology, needs to be resisted. The victims need to be defended. I do not let my atheism and humanism lead me to ignore the suffering of people of faith. I just wish that some of them would reciprocate the solidarity. Some of you will know that last year, in response to appeals from LGBT Muslims, my foundation organized, and is still organizing, an LGBT Muslim solidarity campaign to try and build bridges between the LGBT and Muslim communities, to support LGBT Muslims, and to challenge homophobia within the Muslim community and anti-Muslim prejudice in the LGBT community. This is an olive branch to the Muslim community around the core principle that although anti-Muslim prejudice and anti-LGBT prejudice are different, they both embody prejudice, discrimination, harassment, and hate crime. And that therefore, whatever our differences may be, we have a common interest in working together to challenge them. Now, that campaign was at the initiative of LGBT Muslim people. They came to us and said, why does the LGBT community do so much for all kinds of causes and sub-communities, but so little to support LGBT Muslims? And they told us stories of kids, young Muslim kids, being disowned by their parents and thrown out on the streets, being beaten up by their fathers and brothers and cousins, being targeted for honor killing. One young Muslim woman told me the story of how her brother was discovered to be gay. He was lured to Pakistan, ostensibly on a holiday, and when he got there, he was hacked to death with machetes because he had dishonored the family. And the worst thing, she said, was that she didn't feel able to testify publicly about this because she feared retribution. She feared they would kill her as well. She was straight, but she felt for what had happened to her brother. And over the years, I've heard many similar stories. So it does shock me that most LGBT organizations do not recognize where the sharp edge of homophobic persecution is in our society. I want to repeat, not all Muslims are anti-LGBT. We have some great allies. But there are still pockets where there is very severe persecution and where LGBT Muslims live in fear, at the least disownment by their families and expulsion from their mosque, but at the worst, actual physical violence. I remember during the age of consent protests in the late 1990s, outside Parliament, a young Muslim guy, about 20, came along and spoke very eloquently. We gave him the microphone. He spoke really eloquently for an equal age of consent. It was broadcast on national TV. 2 days later, a posse of relatives broke into his house, kidnapped him, held him prisoner in a basement. He was tied to a chair, blindfolded, burned with cigarettes, until he gave a really convincing promise that he would give up being gay and that he would get married. Now, my question is not why we are doing this campaign, but why so many LGBTI organizations don't. It's not just the Muslim community, within the Anglican Church. We saw only weeks ago at Canterbury, where the Anglican primates rallied and decided to suspend the Episcopal Church in the United States because it defends equal rights for LGBT people. The Anglican Communion, headed by our Archbishop of Canterbury, sided with the bigots against our allies. They sat there with people from Anglican churches around the world who are leading the fight to persecute our community, and instead of rebuking them, they expelled Episcopalians from the United States who stood with us in our struggle for freedom and equality. So I just ask in my final moment that we recognize that organized religion is still a problem. Less so in our country, but still very severely in many countries around the world. And not just for our community, but also very importantly for women. The attack on women's reproductive rights, the right to equal pay and equal treatment, the right to have access to jobs based on gender, is a global shame. Gender apartheid and segregation is a global problem. It's allied and related to sexual orientation and gender identity persecution. And we need to work together, particularly with women's movements, to challenge the patriarchy, the sexism, the heterosexism, the anti-LGBT prejudice that drives this. This is LGBT History Month. My final thought is that we will win in the end. Looking back on the history, we have endured much. But so many brave people, many tens of thousands of unsung, unknown people, LGBT and straight, have walked and marched with us to bring us to this better place where we are today. That's been an incredible, exhilarating, inspiring journey. And although we still have anti-LGBT prejudice, one day, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia will be history. Thank you.